Our story begins in the 2nd century CE, after 2 turbulent centuries of Roman rule over Judea, just decades after the Holy Temple in Jerusalem was destroyed. It was a dark time for the Jewish people. The Talmud tells us of a discussion among a group of 3 scholars, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, all of them esteemed colleagues and students of the same master, the beloved teacher, Rabbi Akiva. The topic turned to the Roman Empire. Rabbi Yehuda began innocently enough, remarking, "How pleasing are the actions of this nation, the Romans. They established marketplaces, established bathhouses, and established bridges." Among the many contributions of the Roman Empire, one might say. Rabbi Yossi remained silent, and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai retorted, "Everything they established only for their own purposes. The marketplaces are full of corruption and immorality. The bathhouses serve their own self-indulgence, and the bridges they use to collect taxes from all who pass over them." Another colleague, listening into this discussion, told what he had heard to his household, and they told others until the Roman rulers learned of them. It seems that betraying confidences didn't start with social media. And as a result, the rulers decreed, because Yehuda elevated Rome with praise, he will be elevated and appointed as head speaker of the sages. Because Yossi remains silent, his voice will be silenced through exile. And Shimon Bar Yochai, who denounced the government, will be condemned to death. Now, Rabbi Shimon managed to escape along with his son Eliezer. They found a cave to hide in, and it is said that a miracle occurred there. A carob tree grew up there, and a spring of water bubbled up by the mouth of the cave. The carobs and the water sustained them. For 12 years, they remained isolated in the cave. They spent their days studying Torah. Much of the day, they would remove their clothing, cover themselves with sand up to their necks. And when it came time for daily prayers, they put on their clothes out of respect, kind of like putting on a nice shirt for a Zoom meeting. After their prayers, they removed their clothes again to preserve them from wear and tear. For 12 years, they survived this way until one day, it is said that Elijah the prophet came and stood outside the cave and said, "Who will inform Shimon Bar Yochai that the emperor has died and that the death decree has been revoked?" Hearing that, Rabbi Shimon and his son got dressed and emerged from the cave. So let's pause for a moment and imagine what it must have been like for them to leave isolation after so long. Were they overjoyed? Were they concerned? Were they fearful? What did they expect to see after 12 years? How would they respond to a world that was certainly different from what they had remembered? What skills had they lost in 12 years of living alone together, engaged in their favorite activity with all their needs taken care of? Once outside the cave, they saw people who were plowing their fields and sowing seeds. And Rabbi Shimon declared with anger, "These people neglect the eternal life of Torah study and only engage in material and temporal life for their own benefit." And it is said that every place that Rabbi Shimon and his son directed their eyes would burst into flames. A Babkol, a divine voice, was heard chastising them. "Did you emerge from the cave in order to destroy my world? Return to your cave." Rabbi Shimon and his son were not able to live peacefully in the world. They had adapted to their isolation. They'd become trapped in their new habits, and more pointedly, in their limited way of thinking. They simply couldn't imagine that good people might think or behave differently from them. They were convinced that only their way of being, their passion for Torah, as laudable as it was, that their worldview was the only correct one. They were so blinded by anger, they could not even see what had changed for the better. After all, the old emperor was gone. The decree had been lifted. But alas, when the world did not bend to their way of thinking, they were filled with destruction, fueled by despair. This story, sadly, could easily describe any one of us coming out of our isolation. After 18 months, the world looks somewhat familiar, yet is alternately confusing or frustrating. Eager to come out of our isolation, we return to the world, bolstered by our own opinions and our own way of doing things. And as it turns out, emerging is not so easy. The world is not the way we had hoped. We could be angry. We are grieving. We are frustrated. We are fearful. And now that we are still facing an uncertain and frightening future, some of us are close to giving up hope. But the story of Rabbi Shimon doesn't end there. Hearing that bat kol, that divine voice, Rabbi Shimon and his son did return to the cave. They remained there for another 12 months. And at that point, they prayed that their year of judgment should atone for their sins. A bat kol, a divine voice, was heard once again, ordering them to emerge from their cave. And they came out of isolation for a second time. And this time, the Talmud tells us, wherever they found destruction, they brought healing. What had changed for the two of them in those 12 months? A later commentator, the Toldot Yaakov Yosef, explains that the second time when they emerged from the cave, Rabbi Shimon and his son had learned compassion. When they first left the cave, they were enraged by other points of view. But when they were sent back into the cave, I believe they took on a practice. One might call it a practice of hope. This commentator notes that in those 12 months, they learned a better way of being in the world. I would say those were months of tshuva, of an honest reckoning with the world and with their place in it. After a year of working on themselves to be different inwardly, Rabbi Shimon and his son returned to the outside world differently. The world no longer looked hopeless. In place of anger, they brought compassion. In place of hard-heartedness, they brought open hearts. In place of despair, they brought hope. We can become like Rabbi Shimon and his son as we take steps to emerge. We welcome a new year because it reminds us to hope. We begin the year with the hope that anything is possible. This last year has been filled with making the impossible possible. Who could have foreseen that vaccines that are safe and effective would be widely available in record time? Who could have imagined gymnastics superstar Simone Biles taking a step back from the spotlight of the Olympics and standing up for mental health? Who would dream that the star of the inauguration would be a young Black woman named Amanda Gorman? Who would have thought that families would be brought closer together during the pandemic, whether by living in close quarters or by speaking on Zoom across oceans and continents? Who could have envisioned that more people than ever before would join Torah study on Zoom week after week? Who would believe how much we were able to carry on, to learn, and to grow despite our setbacks? Hope is a practice. It requires diligent attention, especially when we are feeling most pessimistic. Sorrow may arise. Disappointment may appear. Anger may visit. Yet we can't allow sorrow, disappointment, and anger to overcome hope. These three are our guests. Hope is our home. I turn to these words of the theologian Reinhold Niebuhr, who reminds us, nothing worth doing is completed in our lifetime. Therefore, we must be saved by hope. Nothing true or beautiful or good makes complete sense in any immediate context of history. Therefore, we must be saved by faith. Nothing we do, however virtuous, can be accomplished alone. Therefore, we are saved by love. And no virtuous act is quite as virtuous from the standpoint of our friend or our foe as from our own standpoint. Therefore, we must be saved by the final form of love, which is forgiveness. As you begin to reflect on the year that has passed, notice the losses, feel the pain, and then notice the gains, even the small ones. Feel the joys, even the fleeting ones. These are seeds of hope. Nurture them, help them grow and flower and bear fruit. And now, what if you practiced hope every single day? What if every morning you woke up brimming with potential, knowing that today, every day begins a new year, a year full of hope for the impossible? Just imagine. Can you hear that song?